Today's video is all about traffic in Vancouver and how that's going to impact where you're going to want to live when you're moving to Vancouver. Stay tuned for all the details. Let's get into it right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with Living in Vancouver, BC team, and today's video is all about traffic in Vancouver. From my perspective, traffic is one of the most important considerations when you're deciding where you're moving. Whether you're moving here from somewhere else entirely or moving within the Lower Mainland, it's a really important consideration because there's a lot of time you could be spending in a car or doing something else. And everybody's priorities are slightly different, and what your threshold for what you're willing to accept is going to be very subjective and very particular to you, but it also has a big impact in the cost of where you're going to live. Areas that aren't as impacted by traffic congestion tend to be more expensive, and the areas that tend to be a little further on the outskirts of the city where commuting is more impacted by traffic, well, those areas of course are less expensive. So these are very, very important considerations. And Vancouver, by all accounts, is a city that has some issues around traffic and around commuting times, but it really depends on the part of the city that you're looking at. But if you're paying attention to the media, we are ranked as one of the worst cities when it comes to traffic congestion in all of North America. In fact, in 2023, there's a couple rankings that indicated that Vancouver was at the very top of traffic congestion in all of North America. Number 2, in fact, I believe behind Mexico City, but ahead of cities like New York City and San Francisco and LA. Now, I think that's a little bit questionable. I think that Vancouver doesn't fare particularly well in those types of rankings because of a few issues around our geography. But I know that people are going to argue with me about this point, and most likely I'm going to see a lot of hate down below in those comments. Feel free to comment if you disagree with me, but I want to get into a little bit of the understanding of why traffic in Vancouver sort of is the way that it is. And let's get into that right now. So what are the unique challenges that Vancouver has when it comes to traffic? Well, I think that there's 3 of them. First of all, I think one of the things that most people don't fully understand is how reliant on bridges we are in Vancouver. Vancouver is, as we know, on the coast, and it's surrounded not only by the ocean and bays, but also by rivers. And it's not just the city of Vancouver, but it's also our suburbs. We have 22 different municipalities in Metro Vancouver. Many of these municipalities are not connected to one another by land. If you want to go from New Westminster to Surrey or to Langley, you need to cross a bridge. If you want to go from Richmond to Vancouver, you need to cross a bridge. Within the city of Vancouver, in fact, you need to cross bridges to get from most of Vancouver into the downtown core. I mean, there is a land way to get in there, but for most people, they're commuting into the downtown core via a bridge. To get from Vancouver over to North Vancouver or vice versa, you need to cross bridges. And so we're very dependent on bridges, which are obviously a choking point. And these choking points can really impact your ability to get around Vancouver. And it's not as easy as just taking another way, because there may not be another way if the bridge you need to take just happens to be backed up. And it could be backed up for a police incident of some sort, construction, or a car accident, or somebody breaks down. But there can be all sorts of reasons why a bridge might be clogged. And that can really, really impact traffic. And it can ruin your day if you're traveling from one end of the city to another end of the city, because it turns a 20-minute, 30-minute commute into an hour-long, 2-hour-long commute. And it can be a bit of a nightmare having to deal with bridges in Vancouver. Now, secondly, I think the thing that people really need to understand is how confined geographically and how small the city of Vancouver is. Now, the city itself is just 110 square kilometers. Yes, Metro Vancouver is closer to, I believe it's about 2,700 square kilometers, but we're talking about mountainous regions, and there's many parts of that people are not living in. But the areas that people are actually living in are quite small in Vancouver because we are so geographically constrained by the ocean, by the rivers, by the agricultural land reserve, and by the mountains that we're surrounded with. As a result, we're a very small city, but also incredibly dense. We are the most densely populated city in Canada, and the fourth most densely populated city in all of North America, behind New York City, San Francisco, and Mexico City. Given that density, given how small we are, given how geographically constrained we are, it's not really a surprise that traffic congestion might be on par with some of those other cities, despite us being a much smaller city. And third, we are a city of immigrants. Now, this is going to be a little bit controversial, but you can imagine Vancouver is one of the cities in Canada that has the most diverse population from people all around the world. And for the most part, these people are coming here having learned to drive in other places. They're bringing their experience and their learning from those other places and bringing it all here. So you know what it's like to drive in Hong Kong perhaps, or in New York City, or in London, England. Those are all different experiences, but all those people drive here in Vancouver and we all do it together. So my feeling, and I don't actually see this sort of talked about in too many places, but my feeling is one of the reasons that we see traffic in Vancouver being a little bit frustrating, being a little bit, not as good as it could be, is that we have all of these people from all these different parts of the world bringing their driving habits to this one small part of the world and interacting with one another here. If you're getting value out of this video, be sure to hit the like button and smash the subscribe button, and also comment down below whether you agree or disagree. I love to engage with my viewers. Comment down below and let's get back to the video. Now let's talk about some of the oddities about Vancouver traffic. A thing that surprises people from everywhere in North America is that Vancouver doesn't have an inner city freeway. It's shocking, in fact. There is no other major North American city that doesn't have an inner city freeway. They wanted to build it. Way back in 1967, it was proposed. They came very, very close to building it, but there was an enormous outpouring of protest from Vancouver citizens at the time. And it was a massive shift in the direction of our city and the direction of city planning. We came very close to, I would say, losing our identity. They were planning on getting rid of all sorts of inner city neighborhoods that at the time were sort of viewed as being a blight on the city. And the idea was that you tear down what you don't like and you rebuild it new. So our city would have looked a lot more similar to Seattle and its inner city freeways, or LA and its inner city freeways. Think like 3-story highway systems running along the waterfront with 8 lanes of traffic on each level. It would have been a massive change from the way that our city sort of naturally developed and the way that it feels today. Our neighborhood system would not be what it is today. So for one, I am grateful we don't have these inner city freeways, but I know that people, when they come from other parts of North America, they can feel a little bit frustrated that we don't have that inner city freeway. We don't have those ring roads that, makes getting around some cities, I'm thinking of Calgary here, for instance, quite efficient and really easy to get around. Another thing that people really need to understand when they're coming to Vancouver is just how abundant non-car options are and how reasonable they are. And for one, it's because Vancouver is relatively small. So you can often hop onto transit or onto a bike and get somewhere faster than what you might be able to do in a car. So we have an abundance of bike paths, we have bike sharing, we have car shares, we have an excellent transit system, not just buses, but also sort of our subway, the SkyTrain, and then a bit of a longer commuter train that's called the West Coast Express that brings people from further outer suburbs into downtown Vancouver. These are all really reasonable alternatives to driving a car, to the point where, we are getting more and more adoption of non-car options, because driving into the city is taking longer, parking is costing more, gas is costing more. So younger people are starting to look at more alternatives rather than just relying on an automobile. Vancouver is kind of at the forefront of places where people are really happy, and not always happy, but they're looking at alternatives to just sitting in a car and commuting via car. Another thing that I want to talk about when it comes to transportation is how our city can really shut down when it snows. And the truth is, we get made fun of a lot from coast to coast all across Canada when it snows in Vancouver, and our city kind of shuts down if there's just 4 or 5 centimeters of snow, which is pretty laughable when you're looking at it in terms of the kind of snow that a city like Calgary might get, or Winnipeg, or even Toronto in the middle of winter. The reality is, because it snows so seldomly, our cities don't put a lot of stress on snow clearing. Personally, I find they actually do a pretty phenomenal job, but they do it on a shoestring budget. So in comparison from the city of Vancouver to the city of Montreal as an example, our budget for snow clearance is at 1 or 2% of Montreal's snow clearing budget. Now, of course, Montreal is a bigger city and it obviously snows a lot more, but they are very, very serious about their snow clearing. In Vancouver, we're looking at about spending, in Metro Vancouver, they spend about $10 million annually. The city of Vancouver itself spends about $4 million. It snowed about a month ago and we had a pretty substantial snowfall. And it's those substantial snowfalls when the city really goes out in full force. They had all of, the main streets salted and all the main streets cleared within hours of the snow falling, but side streets are not so great. Another thing, sort of a frustration of citizens, is there's a little bit of a gap because, as I mentioned, there's so many bridges. The cities themselves will often take care of the snow within their own confines, but the bridges from one city to another are not either city's jurisdiction. They're often provincial jurisdiction. The province has been a little bit lax in clearing snow on the bridges. So that is something to consider. Like if you had to go between Surrey and New Westminster as an example, in the last snowstorm, there were problems with the bridges being cleared. But within the city of Vancouver, within the city of Burnaby, within the city of Richmond, there was excellent snow clearance very, very quickly. Okay, so what are the solutions? How do you mitigate the issues around traffic in Vancouver? Well, I think there's a few different ways. Number one, I would really think hard about crossing a bridge between where you live and where you spend most of your time, whether that's working, but if you work from home, it might be what you do for fun. If you love going into the mountains, maybe you shouldn't live in Delta. Maybe you should live in North Vancouver. Obviously, budget plays a role in this, and obviously not everybody can make these choices. But if you are able to, if you have that freedom, I think it's a really hard thing for people to understand from many other parts of North America, just how much bridges can impact your commute. Because if you're commuting even from North Vancouver, which is just across the bridge into downtown Vancouver, it could make a 20-25 minute commute into an hour-and-a-half commute if the Lionsgate Bridge is shut down, if there's some serious issues. So when you're thinking about where you want to live and you want to minimize the impact that traffic can have on your daily commute, really think hard about whether or not you want to cross a bridge. Now, there are opportunities where you're not going to need to cross a bridge to move from where you live and where you work. It depends entirely on where you do work or where you want to spend most of your time. But that's something I can help you with. I can help you understand. Being a realtor, having helped hundreds of people move here from all around North America over my lengthy career, feel free to reach out anytime. My contact information is right there on the screen. We can get into more details about where might be the right place for you to live to avoid these commuting issues. I would also recommend trying to live closer to where you're going to spend most of your time. It's something I feel more and more people are doing these days in Vancouver. More people are sort of sacrificing space to get a better location, because that better location is going to cost more money. And if you want to live in the city of Vancouver, if you work in Vancouver, well, you're going to have to spend more money for less space. Obviously, a 2-bedroom condo in Vancouver is much more expensive than it is in Langley. But if you work in Langley, well, by all means, live in Surrey, which is right next door, and you won't need to cross a bridge in order to do that. But it's a very important consideration that I think people really need to put at the forefront of their decision-making when it comes to where they want to live. Keep in mind also that if you do need to move out into the suburbs, that there are excellent transit options. I know, again, this isn't necessarily the case in other parts of North America, or something that, more people sort of traditionally wanted to avoid, but Vancouver has excellent transit systems. So for closer locations on the inner suburbs, areas like Burnaby, Coquitlam, Surrey, New Westminster, there's the SkyTrain, and that makes commuting a breeze. You don't have to worry about traffic. You don't have to worry about the bridges, which is phenomenal. And then for the outer suburbs, there's the West Coast Express, and that will get you in to the city of Vancouver from places like Port Coquitlam, Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge, and as far as Mission. And a lot of people are doing that today and making that commute a breeze. I remember years ago having a colleague that commuted in from a very distant suburb, and he would work on his commute because he was taking transit. And that's an option if you're taking especially the West Coast Express. And finally, definitely try and make use of those car alternatives. There's more than just transit, there's more than just cars. And especially if you're living close to the city of Vancouver, you're gonna have tons of bike paths. Walking is always an alternative in a smaller city, depending on where you live, of course, but also things like bike shares and car shares. There's so many alternatives for people. We're no longer completely dependent on cars, and more people are making that choice and making their commutes a lot easier than they once were. So those are all things to keep in mind when you're thinking of moving to Vancouver. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up and smash the subscribe button to see more videos just like this one, because I put out these videos every single week. Don't miss a single one. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you sticking to this video all the way to the end. Check out these other videos that I think you're really gonna enjoy. I'll catch you on those, and I'll see you on next week's video.